Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Becca King. I'm president of the Save Ackworth History Foundation. And I wanted to let you know for the past several years, we have been giving scholarships to high school students who are planning to study history. And to date, we've awarded over $16,000 in scholarships, so we're pretty happy about that. And this year, we decided to open up to KSU students who are majoring in history. And we have 2 KSU students who will each receive a $1,000 scholarship tonight. Our first recipient also received a scholarship 2 years ago when she graduated from North Cobb High School. She's had an exemplary experience at Kennesaw State. She's majoring in history, minoring in international affairs. She's got a GPA of 3.93. So please help me congratulate Alexandria Courier. Let's let him get it. Okay. Hang on a second. All right. Just one more. Thank you. Our next recipient really needs no introduction. He's our speaker tonight. He's also received a scholarship last year. He's now majoring in history at KSU. In addition to being a full-time student, he does a lot of volunteer work, including for Save Ackworth History. He does his countless hours he spent volunteering with us. I really don't know what we would do without him, so please help me congratulate Andrew Bramlett.
Maybe you should wait till after the presentation to see how I do.
Anyway, Andrew is our speaker tonight, so Andrew, take it away.
All right. So, first things first, I should warn y'all, I've been under the weather about a week. It's nothing contagious, but if I start acting up a lung, it's not you, it's me.
Tell them the bad news.
What's the bad news?
If you do get under the weather, I'll fill in for it.
Oh yeah, that's a very bad news. So, looking around us here in North Cobb, it is hard to deny the impact of the railroads. Now, speaking about our group itself, the Save Ackworth History Foundation began about a decade ago with a mission preserving the Ackworth Depot, which is on our group logo. That's was recreated and is now downtown. Just down the tracks in Kennesaw, the new centerpiece of downtown is the Depot Pike Amphitheater. A locomotive general appears in the city logo. Clearly, trains are quite important here in North Cobb. They helped shape the face of our area, brought early community members to this region, created 2 vibrant downtowns. For close to 180 years, railroads have been a vital part of this area. However, we're not here to discuss the successes of a railroad, as you might have guessed from the title. Across 180 years, there is plenty of time for mistakes and accidents to occur, and that's the focus of today's presentation. Starting way back in the 1850s, we'll move forward all the way into the 1970s, and cover the most notable, memorable, and impactful train derailments in North Cobb. I cannot, of course, cover everything. If there are any notable accidents you remember that I don't mention, please feel free just to raise your hand and describe it. At the same time, if you have any additional stories to share about these train wrecks, please don't hesitate to share them. I'd love to hear what people have to say about these. Before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to cover the history of railroads in North Cobb. Last year, Dr. Albert Chirella of Kennesaw State spoke to Save Ackworth about railroads in North Cobb and covered these major changes. I don't want to repeat all that info since many of y'all were here, so we'll share just a very brief overview. In 1836, the state of Georgia tried the Western Atlantic Railroad. Owned by the state, rather than being a private company, it was to stretch from a site south of the Chattahoochee River called Terminus up to Ross's Landing on the Tennessee state line. Surveying began in 1837, was finished in 1840, while construction actually began in 1838. About 1845, it was opened from Terminus, later called Atlanta, up to Cartersville, and the whole line was completed in 1849, with finishing the Chattooga Mountain Tunnel up in Tunnel Hill, Georgia. During the Civil War, the railroad was the site of a great locomotive chase, winning the first Medals of Honor. For more information about that story, please of course check out the Southern Museum of Civil War Locomotive History in downtown Kennesaw. I'm not just saying that because we have 2 museum employees here today. The railroad was largely destroyed during the war, only to be quickly rebuilt afterwards. In 1870, management passed into the hands of a private corporation, still called Western Atlantic. It was taken over by the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railroad in 1890, which became the Louisville and Nashville in 1957. which became Steeplewood System in 1982, which became CSX in 1986. Since 1890, it's been a pretty much one continuous railroad, just purchased and acquired and merged and all sorts of stuff over the years. The earliest accident I have found in North Cobb took place on August 18th of 1853. There was a brief mention of it in the August 24th, 1853 Georgia Journal and Messenger, shown here, but a much longer article from the Atlanta Intelligencer of the next day has a lot more detail. According to the Intelligencer, a train of 14 cars led by an engine named Bobble, or Booble, B-O-U-B-E-L, I have no clue where they got the name from, was traveling south towards Marietta. At Ackworth, the engineer asked the fireman, a man named Mr. Carlton, to keep the boiler hot, even though it was starting to show signs of overheating. Though the dial to measure pressure showed all was okay, the fireman felt a good deal of hesitation. The train next stopped at Moon Station, which is an old railroad stop, right near where Giles Road and Moon Station Road meet in Kennesaw. According to the article, jets of water were issuing through the seams and rivet holes of the boiler. While waiting at Big Shanty, the engine's boiler exploded suddenly. The conductor, Mr. P.G. Gleason, you can see named here, was killed instantly, along with 2 employees from the Northern Railroad who were unfortunately never named in the articles. The fireman Carlton's arm was severely damaged and actually was amputated just a few days later. According to the paper, fragments of iron weighing 70 and 80 pounds were said to have thrown almost 100 yards. The engineer actually somehow got to Marietta, I'm still unclear how, and was arrested down there while the engine's remains were examined by the railroad. They found the iron was of deficient quality and the engineer was released. I don't know what his name was, so I don't know what happened to him after that. His name was just never recorded anyway. Because this was such an unusual accident at that time, the train just suddenly exploding in the middle of nowhere, it got a lot of news coverage across the state. Also, railroads being fairly new at that point, it was kind of a novel thing to have happen. Of the early train wrecks in North Cobb, these noonday fill wrecks of 1884 are probably the best documented. There were both extensive newspaper accounts and also photos in the Atlanta History Center collection. In April of 1884, the night of the 14th and morning of the 15th had severe rain and wind. Telegraph wires were knocked down, and, unknown to the railroad, creeks were swelling and washed out sections of the track. At around 1:30 a.m., the number 12 passenger train was 2 miles north of Kennesaw when it reached one of these washouts. I'm not 100% sure which creek was washed out, but I think it is the one that runs through Legacy Pike, the neighborhood in Kennesaw today, right off of Giles Road. Though the engine passed safely, once more cars crossed, that section of track gave way and collapsed. The mail car, baggage car, and express rail car were all burned in an ensuing fire. They had like gas lamps and those wooden cars on fire. While none of the sleeping passengers inside were injured, the mail sorter of the mail car was killed instantly. About 4 to 5 miles south, an hour later, the number 8 freight train found itself in a very similar situation. According to the train's conductor, the train was traveling at about 15 miles an hour when suddenly the train gave a quick jerk and the engine dashed head foremost into a deep abyss. It was crossing New Day Creek, close to modern-day Barrett Pikeway, and both the engineer and fireman were killed instantly in this wreck, along with an unidentified black man. While other creeks were washed out across the Atlanta area, there was a whole page in the Atlanta paper the next day just of a listing of all the railroad tracks washed out. These are the only fatal accidents that took place that night. That evening, the Atlanta Journal was able to publish basic details of these accidents, but the telegraph lines were still pretty much down at press time. Many of the passengers on board the train were from the north, and a correspondent for the New York Herald was able to arrive on the scene very quickly from Atlanta. There was a crew that went up to try to help rescue people, get the train out of the river, and he was able to hop on board that train. He gave a full accounting of the human toll of these wrecks. Of that first passenger train, there was 1 man killed and 2 injuries considered fatal. 4 more railroad employees were injured, along with 12 passengers. On a freight train, there were 2 railroad employees and a passenger who were killed. Most of the casualties of both wrecks are from Atlanta. Now, these pictures I've been showing for Atlanta History Center are labeled 1884 in their collection, and as one of these wrecks. I unfortunately don't know which one, so you might have to use your bit of imagination for that. It also could be different wrecks. I'm not totally sure on that point. Kind of mysterious photos. There is one little-known figure in local history who was a part of railroad lore, Nanny Jordan, who was a 16-year-old who saved the freight train in 1901. This one's not technically a train wreck, but it still sort of fits with the theme. Nancy Jordan, who went by Nanny, was born in 1885 and lived on the railroad tracks just north of Kennesaw Mountain. If you know the overflow piping lot at the pipe, right on Old 41, she lived right about there. Jordan's father worked for the railroad, was very familiar with the schedule of the trains. In June of 1901, a heavy rain began to pour around the Jordan home. Looking through a window, the young Nanny Jordan saw debris clogging the culvert, and as the water built up, the tracks began to wash away. Jordan knew that a freight train was scheduled to come soon, and that the damage to the tracks would cause the wreck. She ran northwards to warn the train engineers, H.E. Duckett and E.O. Steele, and because of her warning, a disaster was averted. On Christmas Eve that year, the railroad gave her a golden pocket watch for her heroism. Nanny Jordan passed away in 1957 and was laid to rest in Marietta. After her death, according to legend, railroad engineers passing by the Marietta City Cemetery would blow their train horn to her memory. But if you go down to Marietta City Cemetery, it's also near several railroad crossings, so it could just be as a safety measure. I can see that one going out of the way. In 1911 and 1917, there were two small accidents in Ackworth. On May 24th of 1911, the Dixie Flyer, one of the flagship trains of the NC and St. L, was wrecked near Ackworth while turning a sharp curve. No one was injured. It took about a full day to clear the railroad. The Dixie Flyer also was wrecked in March of that same year in South Georgia, and lawsuits about it was the subject of headlines about that same time. In fact, I believe in this paper, the one at Georgian News, on the same page were articles about those lawsuits. I don't know how severe this accident actually was. There's only small mentions of it like this. Nothing lengthy, no photos of anything. I'm thinking it wasn't too big. I was just sort of capitalizing on the media blitz around those other railroad wrecks, but I'm not totally sure. In April of 1917, according to the Cobb County Times, a quite respectable wreck occurred right near the Ackworth Depot. This is, of all the train wrecks in today's presentation, this is one I'm most interested in learning more about, but can't find anything on. If you have any clues, please let me know. The fact that it took place right in downtown Ackworth, basically next to the depot, if I'm reading this correctly, makes me think it must have been like a big deal. It must be hopefully photos of some kind, but I just can't find anything.
Andrew,
Yes.
why do you think they described it as a respectable wreck?
I don't know. I'd like to think it's just some type of weird 1917 colloquialism, but maybe they just liked it. It could be anything, honestly. This one, it's such a small article. I wanted to include it partly because of that quote. It just describes it so well and so poorly at the same time. The year 1923 was a very unlucky one for trains in North Cobb. Both Ackworth and Kennesaw had major collisions, and both of them actually made national news. On June 25th, 1923, at 5:11 in the morning, a Louisville and Nashville freight train traveling north from Atlanta struck a NC and St. L freight train traveling south. It is worth noting that at this point, the railroad was the NC and St. L if you were riding passenger service. The Louisville and Nashville also ran freight trains on it at the same time. The NC and St. L was actually owned by the L&N at this point. The two trains would collide head-on, and the engine of the NC and St. L train was practically demolished and was loaded onto record by bits, according to one paper. The engineers and firemen of these trains were able to jump to safety, but several railroad employees were severely injured. There was no specific location information reported, outside of the fact it was 1 mile east of town. I don't know if that's from a depot or from the city limits. I'm a bit unclear on that point. This was in newspapers as far away as San Antonio. By the time the papers went to press the next morning, the cause of the accident was not yet determined. Within a few days, it was found that a mistaken signal was the cause of the accident. It was apparently a very unlucky day on the railroad in Ackworth. Later that same day, a car with a group of men from Augusta was hit by a passenger train within about a mile or so from where this wreck occurred. The men were able to jump from the car in time, and no one was killed, but it also made statewide news. The second accident in 1923 was just a few days before Christmas. At 7:05 in the morning on December 22nd, the southbound Dixie Limited ran off the rails near Kennesaw. It was described by that day's Atlanta Journal as the crack train of the NC and St. L, and went from Chicago to Jacksonville. We looked at the Dixie Flyer a moment ago, one of its wrecks. That stopped in a lot of places along the way. I think the Dixie Limited was the sort of express route along that same path. It had only been in service about a month, so it was a fairly new route. The train was traveling around 18 miles an hour, but there were disagreements in newspapers about if the train was on time or 30 minutes behind schedule. Different Atlanta papers have different interpretations of it. The engine, baggage car, and 2 Pullman rail cars were derailed. One of these was a dining car where passengers were eating breakfast at the time. According to the Atlanta Journal, no passengers were injured, but several women became hysterical from nervous shock. Practically all the passengers on the solid Pullman train were asleep, and awakened by the crash, made their escape in night clothes. The accident was described as happening 1/4 of a mile south of the Kennesaw Depot, which, if you map it out, is about where Main Street crosses the railroad tracks. It's hard to tell from these photos. It looks like a fairly remote area, but this is apparently pretty much downtown Kennesaw where this occurred. Several railroad employees were injured. Fireman named W.H. Young, brakeman J.M. Baldwin, and porter J.H. Williamson. The train's engineer, a Decatur resident named J.W. Brown, was trapped inside the cab and was killed by scalding water in the wreck. Like the wreck earlier that year, the accident made national news. A photographer of the Atlanta Journal took several images of the derailed train, which is what's shown here. These, I think, are great photos. They did a good job with these. It's dark, but they did a good job with them. On September 13th of 1938, just 3 miles south of Atwood, a 34-car freight train derailed. I'm not exactly sure where this wreck took place. If you traveled 3 miles south away from the Atwood Depot on the railroad, it'd be roughly near Giles Road. Again, right about near Legacy Pike, like that 1884 wreck. I think this took place about at the same creek. Newspaper accounts are very vague as to which direction this train was heading, but they all stated a broken flange on the wheel of a boxcar close to the engine caused the derailment. The train had 35 cars, 25 were derailed, and 165 feet of track was torn up for the accident. Though I have not found photos of this wreck, it made news for several reasons. First, the regular NC St. L train, the Dixie Flyer, was delayed and was rerouted onto another railroad line, and these delays made statewide news and news in whatever towns it visited across its route. This wreck also took place near the end of the Great Depression, and as such, many hobos traveling on this train. One, a black man named Eddie Chappell, was injured and taken to Marietta for x-rays. Everyone else seems to have been unhurt, but newspapers said that many fled into the woods right after the accident to avoid arrest. The numbers vary in different accounts. One says as many as 30 hobos may have been on this train and fled into North Cobb. There were concerns that bodies would be uncovered with rail removal back to rail cars, but apparently none were found, or none were reported at least. Probably the best remembered wreck in North Cobb took place in 1958. Because it took place downtown and many photos were taken, it is very much persistent in everyone's memory. There's a lot of great photos of this. People remember this one a lot. In prepping for this presentation, I had several people reach out with stories of this particular accident. On June 14, 1958, the number 50 Louisville and Nashville freight train was traveling north towards Chattanooga. Many of the cars on this train happened to be empty, which was quite lucky. Close to Cowan Road at Fowler Service Station, the train suddenly derailed. According to the railroad, the accident was caused by a fallen brake beam on one of the cars. According to the AJC, the cars bounced crazily around, battered down several telephone poles, and shooed off bolts from the steel tracks. All told, about 30 rail cars were derailed, but there was actually an interesting account in newspapers of how they had trouble counting the rail cars because they stacked on top of each other. They couldn't tell if they were counting the same car twice. The damage stretched for 450 feet along the railroad tracks. No one was injured, and outside the railroad cars, the only damage was to a small piece nicked off of Fowler Service Station in the rear. Both proprietor E.L. Fowler and his daughter Beverly were inside the station at the time and were interviewed by the AJC. Beverly was told to run across the street as rocks and dust rained down on the building. Because of the wreck's size and photogenic quality, it was featured in newspapers across the state. Because we have several good photos of this wreck, I would like to go through them pretty quickly. These are all from the Save Aqua History Foundation collection. This one, I'm pretty sure is the same accident. It's labeled that way, but it doesn't totally look the same. I'm looking to get verification on that. Nonetheless, I just love this photo. Wanted to include it somehow. That's a good enough excuse for something like that, isn't it? This is a similar photo to that one earlier, just a little bit closer view of the station. This is them cleaning it up about a day or two later. And then this is that same side of the station. I think they've cleared out some of the cars in this photo. That's all of those. Anyone remember this accident by chance? I figured maybe some people, yeah. This is another favorite of mine. It's kind of a dark thing to say with train wrecks, but this is a favorite, and we'll see why. At 5 a.m. on December 3rd, 1962, a train derailed near the bridge where Cobb Highway crosses over the railroad tracks, right near the Goodwill in Kennesaw. The train was traveling about 40 miles an hour at the time. 24 rail cars were wrecked, and the accident was spread over 300 yards. Some of the rail cars actually fell over a 20-foot embankment. What makes this less interesting is what was inside these rail cars. The wreck caused over $1 million in damage, and to add to that chaos, 2 rail cars were carrying various materials of the Atomic Energy Commission. The spokesman for the Atomic Energy Commission said the materials were not damaged, and there was no danger of radioactivity, none at all. Just a precaution only, they evacuated the whole area, which feels a little bit extra precautious to me, but it worked for them. They never specified what the materials were, only that it was classified, and to this day, I haven't seen anything that explains what it was. According to that day's edition of the Later Daily Journal, spokesmen of the 2 military bases near Marietta said they could not recall any accidents involving nuclear weapons in recent years in this area, which is nice and reassuring.
Andrew, where again was that wreck?
When you are going down Cobb Pikeway, right past Kennesaw due west, and the Pikeway crosses over the railroad right there, it was underneath that bridge.
Okay, thank you.
This accident actually had only 2 injuries. Both railroad employees, instantly both from Albuquerque. And it took a few days to move all the back to rail cars, and people could come back to the area pretty quick. It was only evacuated, it sounds like, for a few hours. Even though the wreck took place right there near Goodwill, it sounds like they evacuated most of south, sort of downtown Kennesaw, as far away as, you know, the El Taco Azteca off of Summer Street, the big yellow house. Mary Helen Hagan, who used to live in that house, said she was evacuated in 1962 because of this wreck. We tend to think of trains hitting cars and causing damage, but interestingly, at the end of 1962, the reverse happened in downtown Kennesaw. On December 27th of 1962, less than a month after that atomic accident, 2 active men were driving at Moon Station Road. It is unclear exactly what happened, but their car struck the side of a train, and the wheel on a boxcar broke. Before I go further, I want to point out with this photo, the caption was, I think, something about the missing wheels. This is the wheels, this is the car they belong to, it just tipped over and didn't take the wheels with it. On entering downtown Kennesaw at 5:51 a.m., 12 railroad cars left the tracks, crashing downtown and nearly knocking over the Kennesaw City Hall, because of the corner of Cherokee and Main at that point. A second train was waiting on a siding and served sort of as a shield, which saved other buildings downtown. Another boxcar almost knocked over the Marguerite locomotive General downtown, shown here. Now, that car struck the train right near Moon Station, right about where Giles Road is, but the train actually derailed in downtown. So it was damaged for, about a mile or 2. It was a pretty long time. Which is a very interesting play to this one. Incredibly, the train's engineer said he did not realize what had happened until his train reached Atlanta and he realized he was missing a lot of rail cars. I'd love to know more about that story. The 1960s were a very unlucky time for railroad in North Cobb. I'm not exactly sure why. It's either that these wrecks just stand out more or were just better documented by the newspapers. Either way, there's a lot of good stories to pull from. On June 12, 1964, this wreck took place very close to the Atomic Energy wreck just 2 years before. This is like a couple of hundred yards down the railroad track. 2 Louisville and Nashville freight trains collided just south of the Cobb Highway crossing the railroad. In this aerial photo from the Atlantic Constitution, you can see the trains, and you can see the bridge right there in the background. That's my one bit of PowerPoint wizardry in this presentation. That was all I could manage to do. The number 8 freight train was traveling north from Atlanta, and quite the number 40 Dewey train traveling south. I.E. Dorsey, who was the engineer of the number 8 train, tried to jump from it, but the train actually fell on him after he jumped. After the accident, it was determined the cause was a brake failure of a number 40 Dewey train, which was traveling about 5 miles an hour at the time of a collision. At this point, the railroad, the 2 tracks come together, and the train couldn't stop when it was supposed to. At that exact same spot, that same split of the railroad tracks, just 3 days later, 2 more trains were involved in a very similar accident at that same switch. No one was injured, but 22 rail cars were derailed in total. Again, just 3 days later. That is shocking to me. Within about a month, 2 more wrecks would take place up here in Applewood. And the final wreck of this unfortunate string was in late June, when 9 rail cars derailed in downtown Kennesaw. The railroad worked very heavily in 1964 to assure residents that nothing was wrong, nothing at all. There's a bizarre series of 5 wrecks in 1 month within a few miles of each other. It was merely a very sad coincidence. I don't quite buy that, personally, but I think it's interesting nonetheless. Only that very first wreck on June 12th, I was ordered to death with serious injury. Even though it did not take place in North Cobb, I wanted to include this next one because it's one of the better known accidents in local history. It's one a lot of people remember. There's signs about it downtown Marietta, sort of a well-known part of Marietta history. At about 1 p.m. on May 21st, 1974, a freight train traveling south from Marietta was suddenly derailed when a freight on a rail car suddenly shifted, causing the car to be dislodged from the tracks. Of the 115 cars on the train, only 11 derailed, so not as bad as it could have been. The accident began several blocks north of Marietta Square, but as the train kept traveling through the city, the cars were sort of dragged along on the side of the tracks. At the old Marietta Freight Depot on Mill Street, they crashed into the side of the building. Only a couple in a passing car was injured, and they were thankfully okay within a few days. Countless other cars, which can be seen kind of scattered about too, were damaged, and the train itself was also carrying automobiles, which also got damaged, as you might imagine. Marietta Freight Depot itself, built back in the 1870s, was destroyed in the accident. The shell of it would remain for another 2 years before it was finally removed. Today, if you go down to Marietta Depot, it's the 1896 passenger depot built across the street. This freight depot originally had both passenger and freight service, and 1896 built a new depot just for passengers. If you know the parking lot right across the Marietta History Center that has the train from Glover Locomotive Works, that's where it's at. There's also a nice sign there put up a few years ago about that old freight depot and about this accident that was very helpful in writing this portion of today's presentation. And this is a better photo of what that depot looked like. Much like in 1964, 1977 was a very unlucky year in North Cobb. Across the span of 9 months, 3 major accidents occurred in Applewood and Kennesaw. Unfortunately, the quality of microfilm or microfilm scans also decreases, so the photos aren't as great. So I do apologize for that. On Sunday, March 20th, 1977, 11 rail cars derailed in downtown Kennesaw. Newspaper accounts describe the accident as taking place under the Main Street overpass, very close to the earlier 1923 Kennesaw accident, that one right at Situs Church. Compared to other wrecks that have happened in North Cobb, the damage seems initially quite small. However, of the 2 rail cars, 2 were carrying highly flammable styrene gas that began leaking into downtown. Because of the gas, which was both toxic and flammable, downtown was evacuated. According to Marietta Daily Journal, 125 families were moved out of downtown, 50 businesses and the elementary school were all closed that day. The EPA, firemen, and police arrived at the scene to evacuate the area and clean up the spill. A special crane had to be brought in from Birmingham to clean up the damage afterwards. This was a major disaster. By the next night, the area was declared safe. The LNN would pay many downtown businesses for lost revenue about a few months later. The early morning of September 28, 1977 saw another major accident. 2 LNN trains collided close to Kennesaw Due West Road, which I'm not exactly sure where this wreck took place. I'm thinking it's about the same place as those others, like the atomic wreck. That's kind of close to Kennesaw Due West, as best I can figure, may have been further south. 20 rail cars were derailed, and the chemicals and fuel they were carrying ignited, seen here in this aerial photo. 3 employees of the railroad were sent to the hospital, along with 1 fireman who first responded to the scene. According to Marietta Daily Journal that morning, as morning wore on, fire continued to well up from the underside of tanker cars, bearing the powdered chemical. And this next word is illegible, but it's some type of ammonia. I don't know what type, that's the word that was missing. Every few minutes, a small explosion from the overturned tankers could be heard, as pressure was released and rescuers, according to papers, scurried away, fearing a massive explosion. The heat generated by the blaze was so intense and the smoke so heavy that firemen were kept at bay, like a posted wreckage, only by using a bulldozer and actually cutting through the rail cars to try to get to the height of the wreck. Luckily, this accident was further away from downtown. There's only a few homes, a private school, and a nursing home were evacuated. The wreckage took about a week to clear, but evidently the chemicals were pretty quickly cleaned up. They kind of burned themselves out within a few hours. The final accident in this train took place on Christmas Eve, 1977. Early in the morning, an L&N freight train derailed in Hickory Grove Road in Ackworth. This accident would see 28 rail cars derail, more than any of the other 1977 accidents. However, the damage was comparatively smaller, as only one car leaked chemicals, hydrochloric acid, and the hole was quickly plugged. Local resident Sadie Hamby was awakened by the crashing rail cars just 40 feet from her house. She later told reporters her first thought was the world was coming to an end when she heard the noise. Because of the train wrecks in February 1978 in Youngstown, Florida, and Waverly, Tennessee, these big sort of national, again, media blitzes like earlier, these three train wrecks would receive renewed media attention in Atlanta in the Atlanta Journal in February of 78, as opposed to say 78 on the left. Because of these wrecks, Georgia residents began to push the safety checks of Western Atlantic Railroad line. It was state-owned, but not state-monitored, and they began to push for the state agency to actually monitor railroad safety. We have a Georgia Public Service Commission, but we didn't do that at the time. And it sort of began several efforts to try to sort of patrol railroad safety in Georgia. Now, to close today's presentation, I have a bit of a happier story. Unfortunately for this wreck, I don't know an exact date. All that I have is a recollection of longtime Kennesaw resident Joe Bozeman. However, it's a great story, so it definitely feels like it's worth sharing. Susie Stegall, shown here, was a beloved music teacher and newspaper correspondent in Kennesaw. Stegall's house is on Moon Station Road, at the parking lot where the weekly Kennesaw Farmers Market is currently held. Sort of, like Big Shanty Bible, sort of right across the street from that. She called the house Magnolia Hill. It was believed it was two railroad shanties, which were moved together and converted into one house. Because of this, it had no indoor plumbing, and she instead relied on an outhouse in the backyard, which feels like a weird detail, but becomes very relevant in a moment. According to Joe Bozeman, one day Stegall had just finished doing her business in the outhouse when she began to walk back towards her home. Suddenly, a train came through town, derailed, and knocked the outhouse over about a minute after she'd been in it. The Louisville National Railroad was very apologetic, as you might imagine, and as an apology, they installed indoor plumbing inside of his house, which I think that's a fair trade. I am assuming this is either the December 1962 wreck, one of the June 1964 accidents. Both took place in downtown Kennesaw, right about this spot, but I haven't determined which one exactly. None of the newspaper accounts of this period mention Susie Stegall or mention that an outhouse got knocked over. That's a weird detail to mention, so as such, a lot of this wreck is just a mystery. That being said, it's very fun. So with that, I've reached the end of the presentation. I just wanted to open it up if y'all have any stories you'd like to share, because there are so many train accidents that we've seen in North Cobb. I'm sure that there's many memories, especially of that one, Fowler's back in '58. So, anyone have anything to share? Yes.
Andrew, I'm Brad Quote, and in my early years, lived in the city of Ackworth. I remember the Fowler wreck and the one down on Hickory Grove Road. But if any of you were here at that time, do you recall around Moon Station, there used to be railroad worker houses, or I don't know what that term for them. And when they did away with those, they moved one of them, which still exists, where Dance Road turns now off Main Street, Kenworth Park. It's the second house on the right.
Interesting.
I talked to the family down there, and they are aware of the history of that house. It's been remodeled extensively since then, and actually, the residents may be here today. Is that you? So it's interesting to me that there's still some railroad history around like that.
Absolutely. I had not heard about it before. I'll have to look into it.
And tell me again which house that is.
You go south on Main Street,
Right.
Kenworth Park is on the left, and Nance Road turns off.
Right.
I believe it is the second house on the right.
So it's
Going
past
south.
Carson
On
and
Dance Road or on Main Street?
It's on Main Street.
Always on Main Street, past that intersection.
I think.
Well, is that because they call it Main Street?
So it's like right near North Cobb Christian.
Pardon me?
Right near North Cobb Christian.
Yes, before you get to that, yeah, sure. But the house faces Main Street. And like I said, I talked to the residents down there about 3 years ago, and they are very aware.
Now, how did you know?
I remember as a kid moving the house there.
Really?
Yeah.
That is
It was moved there.
Andrew, this is in the form of a comment and having grown up here. The moon station, same location that he's referencing. For the history of all, that crossing that's now closed was haunted. You could go out there at night and you could sit on the middle of the track and no trains coming, and you could see the light where the conductor was trying to stop the train before it derailed on the first accident, and then on the second one, the story remained. So, just local lore, as a child, not so much of a child, a teenager, we'd go down and look for the light.
Very cool. North Moon Station, I gotta ask everyone because I don't know. I've been hunting for ages. Does anyone know where Moon Station got its name from? I've never found anyone who knows. There's not like a Mr. Moon in census records. I can't find any records about a Mr. Moon. I'm assuming there was a Moon who was somehow involved with the railroad. No clue. Anyone here by chance? Gotta try it, please.
May I add one other thing?
Yeah.
At one point, one time, a fellow named Bobby Jarrett lived in Akron. He moved from Cassville. He wrote a book a few years ago about growing up in Cassville, Madeiraville area, and moved here. And if you know where Southside Drive is, Cranes, what used to be Cranes Tax Garden, then there's Spring Street. Going that direction, east, I guess. From Spring Street further east, there's one house. The second house is where the Jarretts live, in the downstairs portion of that house. Upstairs was a grocery store, which his dad owned. And Bobby's job, he said at that time, was to take care of fruit that had rotted. So they would take, they had burn pile just on the bank of the railroad. And he would go over there. Every time a train came by, if he had fruit, he'd throw his box car. You need to read this book, but anyway, I wish Bobby was here. Anyway, he was out there one day and realized there was a lemon that was not rotten. And he threw it against a boxcar, as he was prone to do. He said, it was just a few seconds. Just a little bit north of him, a Fowler train wreck, dust flying and everything. And a fellow named Gene Brooks came riding down his bicycle, yelling and screaming, train wreck. And Bobby thought he wrecked that train. Well, then we get that boxcar. He was scared to death. You have read the book or you heard the story?
No, it sounds kind of familiar, but I don't know the story.
Yeah, if you get a chance, I love the book. I've read it twice. The title of the book is Lunchroom Burned Down and I'm Hungry. Bobby Jarrett. I recommend
A
it.
lot of good stories in there.
Yeah.
I was having trouble finding this one, and I couldn't remember who told me about it. Is there a story about a train wreck, and is it pencils or shoes, something in Akron? I could be crazy, but about someone that got like a big supply of stuff out of one of these train
Yeah,
wrecks.
this is the 1958.
Okay.
What's now Jones Tower, they had shoes in one of the cars that derailed on this side of the track.
I think Jack Turner is the one that told that story.
Okay.
He's repeating the news story.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds right.
And that's now Jones Tower.
Is your one that's supposed to have any kind of installed?
Oh, yeah, I couldn't, this is also one I couldn't find good documentation on. Evidently back in the 90s, this is a whole bunch of research. There was Kennesaw, it has like the big crossing on Cherokee Street, all the trucks get stopped there. Every year, some truck gets hit by a train. We all know the story. Apparently there was one that was carrying, I think it was Snickers, and like the whole of downtown got covered in just Snickers bars. It was either that or M&M's, one or the other. Yeah, I'd be happy either way, personally.
I'm not good at speaking around crowds, so if I have hyperventilate, just ignore me. I was hoping you'd bring up or have information on the train wreck behind Junior Prather's barber shop, or Tim Prather.
I don't think I know about that one.
1966.
Hickory Flat.
Hickory Flat.
Hickory Grove
Hickory
Road.
Grove, it's a Hickory Grove back
Okay.
south of
I don't think I know about this one.
We live by what's Crane's taxidermy, and I'd watch trains go by, and I watched this one evening flying by. Well, in a little while, somebody come to the house and said it was a big train wreck. So we went down there and they had the big lights on it. And it was mostly piggyback trailers and had those auto carriers with new Mustangs. And
Wow.
that's always been my favorite wreck. I was hoping you'd have a picture.
I will have to go looking for
But-
one. That's great.
Some of the trailers was loaded with whiskey. And it was a real strong smell all over. And back then, that was a remote area. And I always wondered how many cases or bottles of whiskey got missing. But that was back in the day where, if anybody remembers, the public could wander around train wrecks. You don't dare do it now, but I went there the next day, and one of the trailers was on its top, and there was some little boys throwing caps in a big box, with busted glass. And I remember one little boy told some people, said they got 50 cents for every cap they found. I never thought about it then, but I imagined they was wanting to see how much was missing. But that's always been an interesting wreck.
I'll have to look more into that one, yes. Any other questions? Well, thank you all. I hope you enjoyed it.
Fantastic.